It's 3:15, and that means it's time for
The Real Deal with Bill McNeil.
That's right. Welcome once again to The Real Deal with Bill McNeil. I'm your host, Bill McNeil, and you're probably wondering exactly what is the real deal today.
Hey, good question.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's been a big day in comic books, specifically with Substack. Seemingly poaching off some top-level talent. They'd already grabbed Nick Spencer off of Amazing Spider-Man from Marvel Comics. Now they have James Tynion IV, the lead Batman writer. And we have a few other names that are on this list that are going to be over and creating some comics with Substack. Among them, Saladin Ahmed, Dave Acosta, Molly Ostertag, Scott Snyder, and Jonathan Hickman. And in this video, I'm going to concentrate on Jonathan Hickman. For a while now, I've been reporting on the channel. I've been hearing behind the scenes that Jonathan Hickman wasn't overly involved in the X-Men line and had been for quite some time. The head of X, well, I guess Jonathan Hickman's the head of X, but the group editor for X-Men, Jordan White, even confronted himself not all that long ago in an interview where he said, we're long past what Jonathan Hickman was setting up with House of X, Powers of Ted. We're kind of doing our own thing. Not surprisingly, Jonathan Hickman is taking his wares over to Substack, which is probably a better place for him anyway. And I see all this stuff as very exciting. We've been talking here on the channel. I've been talking with Perch, and in some solo videos. There is a lot of money to be made in comic books. The comic book industry is, in fact, growing, but not on the backs of DC and Marvel and traditional Western comic publishers, unfortunately. Now, there is some growth there. I don't want to discount that, but we're seeing massive growth via the kids' graphic novels, YA graphic novels, and most specifically manga. And everybody's been wondering, well, what are we going to do with manga? How do we compete with that? What can we learn from manga? And we've definitely seen, and Perch and myself have talked about it many times, that DC and Marvel are learning nothing from manga. They're not adjusting their models for anything. And what we're seeing now are a group of comic creators that are well-known, that are established, that are seeing this growth in the comic book industry. And they're seeing that, in fact, the big two, DC and Marvel, in their archaic ways, are holding them back. And they're taking kind of some may see it as a hybrid model of what Brian Polito, EVS, and others are doing with crowdfunding, right? You go out there directly to the customer, you promote your wares, and you distribute yourself. They're kind of doing that. This is actually much closer to what they do in manga via their Shonen Jump app. They will debut new comics on Shonen Jump, and if they're good, they continue, and if they aren't, they don't. That's how One Piece started. It was a trial on Shonen Jump. People responded to it, and it did very well. It's continued on. I think there's been 1,000 volumes, something like that, of One Piece. So what we're going to see, I imagine, this is what I think is happening with Substack specifically, is you get your Substack, comic lineup, you release them digitally, direct to customers. They pay. There's a paywall, so they pay a subscription fee to go in there and read your comic books. And then, if it's successful and you continue doing it, you go in and release it on trades, kind of like what Scott Snyder had already announced with what he's doing with Comixology. Scott Snyder has 8 new comic books with top-tier artists: Greg Capullo, Francis Manupal, Jacques, and others, that he's going to release on Comixology. They'll be available to those with Comixology Unlimited. I imagine you can buy them singularly as well. And then the trades will be released via Dark Horse. And I think that's what this new Substack model is going to be. Digital comic books with the creators themselves owning the distribution rights for physical publishing later on in the form of trades, which is exactly how manga releases their comic books. You get it digitally, and then you get collections. So I see a lot of people say, well, they're just copying what's going on in Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Now, they're definitely, Kickstarter and Indiegogo, I imagine, have definitely emboldened some of these creators to say, you know what? There's money to be made out there. I don't need DC and Marvel to do it. But they're going more of the manga route, which I think is very exciting. I'm glad to see somebody say, you know what? I don't need DC and Marvel holding me back anymore. It's time to move on. And Jonathan Hickman is one of those people. And he is starting a Substack. He's not so much starting a line of comics like James Tynion announced. He's creating a world of comics. Basically, it's a shared comic universe, and creators are going to come in and work in it. Obviously, he's going to do some of that work. And what's most telling, and the reason I think that he's probably, after Inferno, done with Marvel Comics, or if he's there, it's in name only. Because when he talks about his time at Marvel, it's in the past tense. the way he says it. And this is how he opens up his newsletter, which you can go to. It's called 3 Worlds, 3 Moons. It's on Substack. There will be a link in the video description. And this is what he said. So I've spent the last couple of years helping head up the X-Men office at Marvel, and it's been a pretty fascinating ride. Tried a lot of stuff, learned a lot of stuff. As I said, speaking the past tense. Speaking of the things he accomplished at Marvel, I imagine his name will still be on some of those X-Men comics moving forward, but it's clear that he's moving his focus away, and he kind of talks about it and why he's going to be committed to digital moving forward also in this newsletter. He goes on to say, but the biggest thing I wanted to try never came to fruition because Diamond, our largest comic book distributor in North American comic industry, was able to get back up in the middle of the pandemic and start shipping books again, when for a few weeks it looked like they might not be able to. And really, you can blame that on DC Comics, for good or bad. Once they decided to drop Diamond and go to Lunar and UCS and open up their own new distribution, it forced Diamond to get back up. So this might have happened if DC had not done that. This was a good thing, of course, speaking about them getting back up. But when the news first hit that they were halting distribution, Marvel paused a huge chunk of their line, and I was pretty concerned that the company would make increasingly radical decisions regarding content and deliverability, because the one thing Marvel doesn't tolerate is a prolonged assault on profit margins. And that probably goes on to Disney as well. We can see they've made some radical decisions lately, right? We're releasing movies same day in theater and on their Disney Plus platform and charging $30. And if you saw the news come out a couple weeks ago, potentially breaking contracts with Scarlett Johansson was the first person to come out. So they definitely would do radical decisions to make sure that there was some profitability. And we know that Disney was obliterated by the pandemic, just with the shutdown of tourism in general. Cruise lines, you couldn't go to theme parks, everything was shut down. People couldn't go to movies. The only thing that they had to make money was like Disney Plus streaming platform and some other subscription services. And then he continues. So with the mindset of chaos breeds opportunity, I sat down and wrote up a plan to take the entire X line digital. So he believes the future of comics is digital, and I agree with him to a degree, which went absolutely nowhere because Diamond and the market recovered. Again, that was great because everyone had their jobs restarted and the stores got to stay open and the fans got to have new comics to read. But there were some pretty great ideas baked into the plan I wrote, and I was secretly kind of bummed that I wouldn't be able to try them out. So Jonathan Hickman, not someone that doesn't think outside of the box. Certainly he's done a lot of very interesting things, just the way he writes comics and the way he's delivering information in comics. Just think about House of X, Powers of 10. He's decided he wants to try something new digital strategy-wise. He wasn't able to implement it with Marvel Comics, and this new Substack opportunity will give him that chance to do everything digital first and then release things in trades, much similar to the manga market. He sees the opportunity and the potential growth there, and he's completely right. Here's another thing he says in this newsletter, and this really talks about his issues with Marvel and just comics in general. The two biggest problems with the way we make comics now are, number one, because of the solicit, preview, pre-order hierarchy, we've systematically erased surprise from the industry, 100%. I do a comic book solicitations video every single month for both of the big two publishers. Every month I get spoiled on things that I'm reading and was not aware were coming forward. Deaths, big twists, turns, and things like that, because you're reading the solicitations and you're reading the events, a summation of some of the events that are going to happen like 3 months out. So he's 100% correct. There is no surprise left. because Marvel and DC and the marketing departments there, they don't have faith in their comic line that people will order it if you don't give away the spoilers. Talking about retailers. And number two, we're locked into a static storytelling format based entirely on an existing economic model. And that he's talking about, you have to release your stories 22 pages at a time monthly for the ongoing format of what they do at DC and Marvel as far as storytelling, which has been used, serialized comic book storytelling has been used for decades. It's been the standard for a very long time in the industry. There have been opportunities and chances of, specifically I'll talk about Marvel, where they've taken and tried to change that up. Remember Marvel Comics graphic novels line, where you got God Loves, Man Kills, Death of Captain Marvel, some really great stories out there by some really good creators, Chris Claremont and Jim Starlin right there. Unfortunately, they didn't keep that up, but they have tried things in the past, but they've gotten very, very kind of fat and happy, very, very complacent. That's a better word. DC and Marvel have definitely gotten complacent. DC has tried new strategies with digital comics, but they always go right back to what they've been doing in the past. And you can't blame them because it's a proven moneymaker. Once you start deviating from the status quo or the standard operating procedure, you're taking risk. And now is not a good time to take risk if you're a big company, when you're DC Comics working underneath Warner Media, underneath the AT&T umbrella, soon to be underneath the Discovery, Warner Brothers, Warner Media umbrella. Or if you're Marvel Comics working underneath the Disney umbrella. Those are big corporations. There's bottom lines. You can't take a lot of risk there, because if you don't meet expectations, they're just going to shut you down. Everybody will be out of a job. DC Comics and Marvel don't need to continue to make new comics. It's smart that they do, because it's an opportunity to create new stories that they can invest in and hopefully, bank on with future stories in their cinematic universes, whether it be on the big screen or streaming. And there are cheap ways to test them out, but they don't need to. It's not like they make a ton of money. If they start losing money, what are we doing this for? So you have a completely risk-averse, system, specifically at Marvel and DC, less so maybe at some of the other publishers. Although some of them are also under, big corporate structures as well. And that's why we've seen the industry really stagnate. And we talked about there's going to be a lot of change, and I'm going to be talking about that more specifically tomorrow. Once the pandemic shutdown happened, and we're seeing it all. This is all repercussions because of the pandemic shutdown, and having pencils down and letting creators know that maybe, just maybe, their job security wasn't quite what they thought it was working for the big two. As far as the new model, this one's more interesting. This is completely different than what James Tynion is doing. James Tynion is creating a line of comic books that he's creating. He'll hire the artist and everything. He's got the contract with Substack, and he'll release it via a platform or a paywall on Substack. Jonathan Hickman's got a bigger vision. And what he's done is he's partnered with two artists, Mike Del Mundo and Mike Huddleston, who he's certainly worked with in the past. They created their own company and art studio. And what he's done is brought in three other creators, three writers, to work with him on this project called 3 Worlds, 3 Moons. The other three creators are some pretty big names. Well, two of them big names. One of them, I'll talk about the other one first here in a second. Al Ewing, Immortal Hulk. He's working on Venom now. He's got We Only Find Them When They're Dead with Boom Studios. He's designed various religious systems for each world and moon within this universe. Ram V, one of the real up-and-coming creators in the industry that has a real bright future. If you haven't read These Savage Shores, you're absolutely missing out, and you will know why he's such a hot commodity. He's working on the Catwoman line right now. He's doing Swamp Thing for DC Comics. Those are bankable characters, as far as the bigger universe. He's working with Hickman on this. And he said he's done a great job. And Hickman says Ram V is designing an economic model, both black markets and white markets, for the universe. So they're creating all this lore and all this stuff, these rules that you have to work with it. The third creator, and a lot of people said, Jonathan Hickman got saddled with Titty Howard. I said, no, Everything I've been told, he thinks Tini Howard's a great creator, and he specifically asked for a buy date to be in the X-Men office. That's the third creator, and she's creating a magic system that works within the universe. Actually, that falls right more within her wheelhouse than writing X-Men. So we shall see if that is successful. So he's brought Mike Del Mondo, Mike Huddleston, Al Ewing, Tini Howard, and Ram V, at least initially, along for the ride. And it's going to be a shared universe. This is the way he describes it. 3 Worlds, 3 Moons is a concept universe. And we mean this in exactly the same vein as a concept album, where all the individual characters, stories, things we create together add up to be part of a much larger whole. And then he talks about there will be an endless number of comics adding to this unfolding mythology. This is the launch of a new universe in comics, a new and exciting place to tell the best possible stories with no boundaries. We are going to be telling those stories right here, delivering them directly to you as they're born. So once the story is done, it's delivered. You don't have to wait for the release date. If the story is so good, you don't want to tell it in 22 pages. You want to tell it in 44 pages, and you don't want to have a cliffhanger. You just release it in 44 pages, and you release it when it's done. Jonathan Hickman is no longer to be constricted by an old, archaic, outdated model that DC, Marvel, and the other publishers have, beholden themselves to. He wants to remove those things. He wants the opportunity to tell his stories in a more organic fashion that are no longer constrained. Substack is the perfect opportunity for him, and his days at X-Men are numbered. His days at Marvel are numbered. And this is all a direct result of the pandemic shutdown. Crazy stuff. Substack is definitely going to be a big player. We'll see how successful they are. You've got the writer from Batman, the biggest comic character in the entire industry. You've got the writer for Amazing Spider-Man, the second biggest seller in the industry. You've got the man behind the X-Men relaunch, the biggest team book in the industry, and Scott Snyder, who is doing kind of the biggest events in the industry. And so they certainly got some big names here, and we'll see what happens with Substack. Moving forward, I imagine there's going to be a lot more creators looking for opportunities there. But they're seeing you can't continue to be held back by the big two. You cannot be continued to be constrained by old, archaic, outdated ideas of what comic books could, should, or are. Manga has shown you that there's a different way that you can do these things. Kickstarter, Indiegogo have shown these guys that there's a different way to do these things. There are opportunities out there to make money. If you stick with the big two, quite frankly, you're holding yourself back, and you're seeing a lot of these creators do that. Jonathan Hickman's latest one, big things popping. Obviously, we'll be talking about this stuff in depth on the Comics Aficionados, and I have another video coming up tomorrow, just kind of the way that the industry has changed and how shocking it is, and I think you're going to enjoy that. And with that, thank you very much. Big day in comic books, lots of news coming out. And I'll definitely continue delivering it right here on Thinking Critical. And definitely, if you're not subscribed, subscribe to the channel. I think you'll enjoy the content, and we got more stuff to talk about this week.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.